Aliens Explored is a podcast exploring famous and obscure cases of UFO sightings, alien abductions and other strange events from both a believing and a sceptical perspective whilst keeping an open mind. I'm Stu Jackson, a professional actor and amateur ufologist with a particular interest in the crop circle phenomenon. I'll be debating that otherworldly visitations are real. The truth is out there.
And I'm Neil Kelly. I'm a professional actor as well and used to work for the military as an intelligence analyst. I'll be arguing from a more doubtful point of view. I mean, it's all a bit far-fetched, isn't it?
Project Blue Book was the code name for the systematic study of unidentified flying objects by the US Air Force between 1952 and 1969. Its remit was to determine whether UFOs represented a threat to national security and also to scientifically analyse UFO-related data. But was it really a serious study, or was it simply a bureau set up to debunk UFO sightings and discredit anyone who claimed to have seen one? Join us on Aliens Explored as we examine the highly questionable activities behind Project Blue Book.
Welcome back, listeners, to another episode of Aliens Explored, where we look at the skies above us, the hollow earth beneath us, all around us into different dimensions, and all manners of strange goings on. I am one of your hosts, Stu Jackson.
And I'm your other host, Neil Kelly.
How you doing, Neil?
I'm doing okay, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, not bad. A little bit dismayed by the stuff I've been reading in the paper about last night's and today's escapades, and ashamed to be English again.
Yeah, that's. I'm sure I'm not the first person who said it, but yeah, we had a football team. Have a football team that's really something to be proud of. That is an example to us all. Unfortunately, we can't say the same for our country.
No.
I'm sure there are people listening now saying, "Yeah, it's a pair of bloody traitors hosting this show." I'm switching on.
Well, do you know what? If that's how people feel, they're entitled to that view.
I'm sure we have listeners across the political spectrum. Some of whom
possibly, and all the welcome to listen, but you do have to put it with our political opinions. If you're going to. Simple as that. But no, to give our listeners a bit of context, so last night England played a football game, well, a soccer game for our US listeners. It is football. We
call it football. We know that our American listeners have another game called football, but which they call football. Which is not.
That's rugby in armour, or hand egg, I've heard it called.
Hand egg. But it's also popular in. I mean, there's not been much take up in England, but there are American football clubs.
There are,
but they call it American football rather than just football.
Yes. So, but yes, we had. It was some sort of was it a European?
It was the Euro 2020, I guess, postponed from last year.
Right.
And a big competition, and everyone got very excited because we had this England team who had got further in an international competition than any team has done since England's World Cup victory in 1966, way back when you could buy a house for $3,000.
Yeah,
and we still had steam trains running on the railways, but way back when. I'm old enough to remember it, and of course, every time you cannot have an international football competition without you can do a countdown. You can have bets on how long will it take, how many minutes before someone mentions 1966. They've never stopped going on about it ever since.
Well, that's fair enough. But last night was the final of this championship. When England played Italy, and it apparently I didn't watch it myself. I did.
I watched it. Yeah, England got an early goal in. People thought, yeah, great. This is going the way we like it. And then in the second half, Italy equalised, and then nobody could get any traction beyond that. Italy, for most of the second half, seemed to be all over England, and then they went into extra time, which is another half an hour, 15 minutes each way. And then, of course, there was no score there, and then it went to penalties. And they have this thing where the penalties have to be taken by players who are on the pitch when the final whistle goes at the end of extra time. So a lot of extra players were suddenly brought on literally in the last minute, in the last 60 seconds, including at least 2 of the 3 who missed their penalties. They were fed on. They hadn't played the whole game. They were fed on in the last minute specifically to take a penalty, because that's how it works.
Well, I mean, this is not a football podcast, obviously, is it? Just to give our listeners a rough idea, because I've mentioned about being disappointed and being ashamed of being English, so I just want to explain why, really. So England lost to Italy in this football game, just a game. Right, it is just a game. But now you hear on the news you've got people trashing places, breaking into places, committing violent acts against anybody who they consider to be Italian. Whether or not they actually are is another matter.
Or just don't like the look of.
Yeah, and it's just absolutely, it's a fucking disgrace. It really, really is.
And it's par for the course. No wonder the whole world was rooting for Italy.
Yeah. It's not a surprise. That's the biggest shame of it all. I'm not a football fan at all, especially England games. Domestic violence goes up by 26% every time England plays a game. Did you know that, Neil? If they lose, it goes up by 38%. Domestic violence occurrences, and that's just the reported ones. It's a sombering time. Anyway, I don't mean to bring everyone down. That's not what we're here to discuss. And we're already 7 minutes into the podcast.
Let's set the context. This is the mood in which we're going to discuss. What is it we're discussing this week, Stu?
We are discussing Project Blue Book.
So we've neatly segued away from the Euro 2020s to Project Blue Book. Now, Project Blue Book was it was a project. It was. There were 2 sort of short-lived projects before Project Blue Book, weren't there? There was the Project Sign and Project Grudge, which both only lasted. Did they both only last about a year?
Yeah, they lasted a year each, starting in 1947,
and then 1948 for Project Grudge, and then came along Project Blue Book.
I mean, to be fair, I think it's easiest just when you talk about Project Blue Book to sort of merge those into Project Blue Book. I mean, some of the methodologies might have been slightly different, but you're basically talking about the same remit, the same people, just under a slightly different name. So I personally think of Project Blue Book as starting in 1947.
Okay.
Just under a different name.
But officially, Project Blue Book was the code name for the systematic study of unidentified flying objects by the United States Air Force from March 1952 to its termination on December the 17th, 1969. Apparently that isn't true, that it actually finished, I think, the 30th of January 1970, but the Air Force... I don't know, it's the military mindset. They didn't want this sort of seeping into another decade, so they said, well, let's say it ended in 1969, just so no one can say that it went on into the 70s, even if it was only January 1970.
And you know what? I'm going to be fair here. When a project like that wraps up, there's going to be an amount of time taken just to store everything and things like that. So I think it's fair to say that the research itself stopped in 1969. The records stopped. They were tidying up until 1970. But you said about it starting in 1952. According to the Office of National Records, or whatever the official term is, it actually started in 1949.
Right. So
Project
after
Blue Book.
So Project Sign in 47, Project Grudge in 48, and
Project Blue Book in 49. Yeah.
Now, Project Blue Book had 2 goals. Two objectives. Firstly, to determine if UFOs were a threat to national security, because that's what the Air Force is for, to protect the US's airspace and to violate other people's airspace. and also to scientifically analyse UFO related data. Now, this is where the problems started.
Well, just to interject there a little bit, those are the publicly given
the stated objectives. Yes.
Yes. Now, I personally think there was another one which was an official debunking exercise.
A name that we've come across before, J. Allen Hynek, the astronomer, was involved in Project Blue Book.
He was a consultant.
He was a consultant, and
on Project Grudge, if you want to separate them.
And he became very, very disenchanted with the way Project Blue Book was going and the kinds of people who were put in charge of it. Obviously, it wasn't the same commanding officer all the time. There were several, and they seemed to get worse and worse. Eventually, It ended up with just a sergeant in charge. It got scaled right down.
Well, there was no open-minded attitude towards it whatsoever. It was simply, right, how do we stop the public from talking about this? That was the true remit, because that was the mindset. That was that was the actual objective, was to shut people up.
To shut people up or discredit them as cranks, make people reluctant to report things.
Yeah.
So their summary of their investigations was that no UFO reported, investigated and evaluated by the Air Force was ever an indication of a threat to our national security. Secondly, there was no evidence submitted to or discovered by the Air Force that sightings categorised as unidentified represented technological developments or principles beyond the range of modern scientific knowledge. And thirdly, there was no evidence indicating that sightings categorised as unidentified were extraterrestrial vehicles.
Okay, now I'm going to quote from Project Blue Book on that. This is all public information. This is what they have released, what they have declassified themselves. I know, I think there's far more to it personally, but in the public arena, they have said there were 12,618 sightings reported to them. Okay? There were 701 of those that remained unidentified. Now, it might be easy to say, oh, that's the vast majority that are explainable. Well, do you know what? Any ufologist worth their salt will agree and say, yes, most UFOs probably are easily explainable as terrestrial, as optical illusions, as drones, or as misidentified technology, or something like that. But this professional Navy, US Navy department could not identify 701 of these reports. Now, of the three aspects that you've just mentioned, how do they know? If there's 701 that they can't identify, how do they know that they're not extraterrestrial? How do they know that they're not advanced technology? And how do they know they're not a threat to national security if they cannot identify them?
They've obviously shifted the burden of proof, haven't they? They said, well, no, we don't know what it is, but we're not going to say that it's extraterrestrial. There's no proof that it is extraterrestrial.
Absence of evidence is evidence of its non-existence. Well, shame they don't do that about God, really, isn't it, in the American government? I've nothing against religious people, but I do believe in the separation of church and state. Well, very, very strongly.
And the rot set in quite early. In March 1954, a Captain Charles Hardin was appointed head of the Blue Book Project. And his predecessor, a chap called Captain Ruppelt, wrote that Hardin, quote, thinks that anyone who is even interested in UFOs is crazy, and they bore him.
Yes, I'm glad he came into the project with such an open mind.
Yeah, and in the following year, the Air Force decided that the goal of Blue Book should not be to investigate UFO reports, but to minimise the number of unidentified UFO reports. So by a year later than that, by 1956, the number of unidentified sightings had dropped from the 20 to 25% of the Ruppelt era, the first era, to less than 1%. They were basically just... It was a debunking exercise.
Do you know? I'm actually. I might surprise you with this. That aspect of it not the lack of an open mind, but the setting out to find explanations. I actually agree with to an extent, and I think, I don't consider myself a UFO researcher per se. My interest is in crop circles, as we've discussed, but I do think a good UFO researcher will look for kind of mundane answers, mundane solutions to things, because yes, if the vast majority of UFOs out there are just something natural, misidentified technology, drones, optical illusions, whatever they might be, then we need to kind of, it's sorting the wheat from the chaff, Neil. We need to get rid of all the easily explainable stuff, or even the difficult to explain, but there is an explanation, so that we can get to the core element of what about the rest, because there is another section of that, and it might just be 1% of all reported UFOs. I can believe that, I can accept that. Common everyday people, Joe Public, we're not trained to identify a drone from a UFO or whatever, so we are going to report things that are explainable as UFOs. That's going to happen. That's fair enough. We need to identify where those are. So on that particular aspect, like I said, this might surprise you, but I actually agree with them on that one aspect.
Yeah, they've got to, but they seem to be determined to debunk everything. I mean, Hynek suggested that some of the older UFO reports should be re-evaluated, simply with the ostensible aim of moving them from the category of unknown to the category of identified. But it came to nothing.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I can feel Hynek's frustration through the years of history on that.
There was a great quote in what he described the Project Blue Book as, the way he summed it up. Especially, there were two people. There was a Major Quintanilla who took over in August 1963, and really saw it as a debunking effort. And UFO researcher Jerome Clark wrote at that time that by that time Blue Book had lost all credibility. He was physicist and UFO researcher Dr. James E. MacDonald once flatly declared that Quintanilla was not competent from either a scientific or an investigative perspective. And he was, but he shouldn't be held accountable because he was simply following the orders that he had for directing Blue Book. I'm just trying to find Hynek's quote about what he summed up Blue Book as. It was a
well, while you're looking for that, I mean, that's a very interesting sort of observation, is the people who were brought in not only to run Project Blue Book, but to staff it, the people actually conducting the investigations themselves. What were their credentials for this sort of thing? The fact that they'd managed to, I don't know, lead troops into killing enough of the enemy in Vietnam, or no, I've got my time frame totally screwed there, haven't I? World War II, certainly. Is that what their credentials were? Why is someone like a general or a captain or, even a sergeant, why are they the right person to conduct an investigation into something like this? It's going to be the Air Force, because first and foremost, the Project Blue Book was trying to assess whether there was any threat to American security, American airspace. And it's still looked at from that perspective today. We're seeing these things that seem to be violating our airspace with impunity. We just need to know that it's not the Russians or the Chinese who have made some kind of technological leap and now have aircraft that we simply cannot match. I mean, Americans have had this experience before.
in the Second World War. The Nazis were the most technologically advanced, but they were just overwhelmed by American and Soviet resources that they could throw at them. They were the first people to get jet planes in the air. They were the first people to get into combat, drones, ballistic missiles. The British did develop jet planes during World War II, but they were so worried about the technology. Was it the Gloucester Meteor? They were so worried about the technology falling into enemy hands that they didn't let them fly over enemy territory. They were used purely for the defence of airspace around Britain. So if they're shot down, they're going to land in Britain. I don't think any of them ever were shot down. But even 5 years after the Second World War, Americans went to Korea and they still didn't have jet planes, or they still. I suppose they were developing them. But they went to Korea without jet planes, and their turboprop planes came up against the MiG-15, a jet plane, and there was I wonder if that's just played into the American psyche, that they're just worried that the enemy will suddenly produce something that completely outflies them, outguns them.
Could well be, but I'm going to go back to something you said a short while ago about, and quite rightly, about the Air Force still investigates these things today, because I'm going to come up with a quote from the National Archives. This is as of their standing statement when it comes to the US Navy and investigations of UFOs. This is a direct quote from the Archives website, the American Archives website. Since Project Blue Book was closed, nothing has happened to indicate that the Air Force ought to resume investigating UFOs. Because of the considerable cost to the Air Force in the past and the tight funding of Air Force needs today, there is no likelihood the Air Force will become involved with UFO investigation again. And it goes on to say that that there are a number of universities and professional scientific organisations that investigate UFOs, and anything put to them goes to those bodies. What absolute bullshit. We know from recent declaration, from recent statements, Lieutenant Ryan Graves, for example. We know that the Air Force is still investigating UFOs, so there they are, caught with their pants down in a big fat lie. Right there.
Well, how can they not do it? I mean, if an American pilot, an Air Force or Navy pilot, encounters another aircraft, another vehicle, or what looks like another vehicle in American airspace, and is unable to keep tabs on it because it moves so fast or flies in a pattern that he can't replicate, or she can't replicate. They have female pilots now. How can they not investigate that? They're going to say, what was that?
So,
of course they've got to investigate it.
No, Lieutenant, we need to send that to a university. I mean, yeah, bollocks.
Yeah, this could be a new generation of Chinese drones that can do all sorts of things that we can't. Now, Hynek, we know when we discussed Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
He was a consultant on that.
J. Allen Hynek was the person who first came up with the different kinds of encounters.
Yes.
Only 3 kinds at the time the movie was made, but I think there are about 7 kinds now, aren't there? Including,
they've expanded on it,
including breeding with extraterrestrials to produce human-alien hybrids. Now, he started out as an associate member of the Robertson panel that we've mentioned before, that was seriously dedicated to debunking UFOs. But
I like defunking.
Defunking, yeah, funking, debunking. But
they
then
defunked it right
But
off.
of course, he was a scientist, and after being involved in it for a while, he thought, well, no, actually, these actually represent an unsolved mystery and deserve scientific scrutiny. And that was definitely not what Blue Book was about. And in fact, he levelled accusations of indifference, incompetence, and of shoddy research on the part of Air Force personnel. And Hynek noted that during its existence, critics dubbed Blue Book the Society for the Explanation of the Uninvestigated.
Yep. Yeah.
We're not going to look at it. We're just going to come up with a put down. We're just going to call it, label it in some way, and then file it away.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, and interestingly, I'm going to put a specific case to you that I believe was instrumental in the formation, well, initially of Project Sign, because it came about just very, very quickly after the incident in 1947. To do with UFOs is, of course, the very famous Roswell incident, which happened in 1947. Now, here's a bit of, I find, telling by its absence kind of information. There are no records whatsoever connected to the Roswell incident. It's not even mentioned in any records in Project Blue Book. Do you find that odd?
I wonder if it's a similar thing like the COVID recovery bill requirement that all the agencies release their information about UFOs, and they immediately said, well, obviously, we only started collecting data in this record in this format, in this formalized format, in whenever it was 2003 or whatever. So obviously we cannot refer to anything that was cited before then. So they've immediately limited the amount. So no one can say, well, what about Roswell? What about this? What about that? They said, well, no, we just not. That's outside the scope of our data set.
That would be very convenient to ignore historical data.
Because I mean, the Roswell crash, it really was. Was it a farmer just found some wreckage and called the Air Force?
Wasn't it found the wreckage? It happened on his farm, but it was witnessed happening. The crash itself, but yes, there was wreckage, there was bodies. It was all reported in the paper with an official statement from the Air Force saying we have recovered a crashed spaceship and we have its occupants.
But didn't they later change their tune and say, well, actually, it's one of ours? It was an experimental craft.
No, I mean, yes, they changed their tune, but no, they claimed it was a weather balloon.
Right.
Because they have occupants, right?
Yes.
Yes. Anyway, let's say it's that time. I think we're going to be going for quite a quick summary here, by the sounds of it. So Project Blue Book, was it a serious investigation by the American US Navy into UFOs that, took them seriously, or was it just an excuse for a cover-up? What do you think, Neil? Or something else? I don't want to railroad you.
I think it was not so much it wasn't the usual kind of cover-up. It's almost like let's do something. Usually something happens and they think, oh shit, we need to cover this up. It wasn't that kind of cover-up. It was, let's do this thing so that we can have this project going, and we can rotate officers who are kind of, I don't know, maybe regarded as dead wood, their careers are going nowhere. We'll ship them into this dead end job, and basically we'll send them this information, all this vague information, and they'll file it away. And then at the end of the project, we can simply say, oh yes, well, we've investigated that, and we can confirm it was nothing extraterrestrial, and it was nothing that represented a threat that we've looked at. It's just a way of being able to say, well, yeah, we've looked at this, and it's nothing.
Except for 701 records that they can't identify.
Yeah, but the ones that are identified, they've just gone in as well. We don't know, don't care. Yeah. But it's probably something. But no. But as we said earlier, they've shifted the onus of proof. They're saying that just because we can't explain what it is, that doesn't prove that it's extraterrestrial.
Well, which
is a way of arguing. It's a way of reasoning. It's specious.
Don't disrespect that, but I think an open mind is the crucial element. I see it very similar to yourself, but I suppose slightly different. I think that the government set it up with a view to saying, right, we need to prove that UFOs don't exist. We have this big fuck up where we announce that UFOs are real with Roswell, and now we need to announce that they're not real, and we need this program to do it. I think they carefully selected who would be in it because they knew that they would go in with an attitude of, well, they're not real and let's find out. I think one of the reasons why they changed people so often is they kept coming up with information that challenged their ability to just say, no, it's all bullshit. So they had to keep changing the people involved.
Yes, as Hynek said, some of the officers they put in charge were quite open-minded and actually looked at it properly. And they were rotated out. No, we need someone, with more of a military mindset who's going to come and say, oh, it's all a load of old bollocks. That's I'm not open to any suggestions about anything I don't know.
Are you saying, Mr. Ex-military intelligence, that a military mindset is not an open-minded one?
It's quite the opposite. I can confirm it is quite the opposite of an open mind. There's a phenomenon which all service people will be familiar with of being kicked upstairs. That basically, if you have an officer or an NCO who is a real pain in your ass and you hate them and they're just annoying you all the time and you want to get rid of them, the easiest way to do that is to promote them. If you court-martial them or demote them, then the shit hits the fan. There's all sorts of inquiries and people want to know why, and it all gets investigated. But if you just say, well, this guy is a lieutenant, as we call them in England. It's our little affectation. We pronounce it lieutenant because they didn't want to say. Well, now they're saying
don't want to sound French.
They don't want to sound French, or now they don't want to sound American by saying lieutenant. But obviously, it's lieu. It's in. He's acting on a higher authority. He is in lieu of the colonel or whatever. So we want to get rid of this annoying lieutenant. So the easiest way is to say, well, let's promote him to captain. And then he'll be sent somewhere else where they need a captain because we haven't got room in our establishment, and they'll send us another lieutenant. And then he gets somewhere else as a captain, and they say, this guy's really annoying. How the fuck can we get rid of him? I know, we'll bump him up to major, and off he goes. And there's a whole career in that.
I can confirm that's not just the military. That's basically any form of civil service or any sort of government jobs. Any government type agency, like you'll remember the National Coal Board before it became British Coal, and the Post Office and places like that. You'd have these people who would be in a job that was beyond their ability thanks to the Peter Principle. I don't know if you're familiar with the Peter Principle. You show that
everyone
you're really good at a job.
Incompetence.
No, rise above. Always one level above their level of competence, because you just you show you're good at a thing and you get promoted and you're good at that and you get promoted and then you're good at that and you get promoted and oh shit, you're not very good at that, but you're already in the job now. So then you'll get promoted again, but kind of to a meaningless place where you can't do any harm.
Or, and the way it goes now, especially in the world of technology, you might be a good computer programmer, so you get promoted to senior programmer. So he's a really good senior programmer. Let's promote him again. Well, obviously, senior programmer is the senior programming rank. So now he gets promoted into management, and this guy's, a total backroom tech head. He's a computer programmer, and you've suddenly made him a manager, and he's got to use a completely different. Not just set of skills, but bring a different personality to work every day.
That's it. Good foot soldiers don't necessarily make good generals, and probably shouldn't be put in charge of projects researching UFOs. So there we go. Anyway, what do you think, listeners? That's kind of our thoughts, and we went off on a bit of a digression at the end. But what do you think about Project Blue Book? Was it? Do you think it was the US Navy's determined, conscious, sincere attempt to identify UFOs, or was it one big cover-up? We haven't even mentioned Majestic 12 yet. maybe we'll save that for a completely separate episode.
We'll get to it in the
I
end.
think.
Yeah.
Oh, and I mean, we've mentioned it in previous episodes, but yeah, maybe we'll do an episode about that specifically. But yeah, do let us know what you think, listeners. You can let us know via the usual means, through Facebook, through Twitter, each by searching Aliens Explored, or you can email us at aliensexplored@gmail.com. Don't forget to join us next time, though, when we will be going back to 1973, Neil, the year I was born. And we will be looking at the case of Calvin Parker and Charles Hickson, better known as the Pascagoula abduction.
Look forward to that.
Exciting stuff, so join us for that. In the meantime, keep looking through those old archives and watching the skies. Take care.
See you next time. Bye-bye.
Aliens Explored is a Feagle Films production in association with Juicy Falls. Music by Darren Mafucci and editing by Stu Jackson. Find us on Twitter and Facebook by searching Aliens Explored or visit aliensexplored.com.